Now let's talk about conclusions.
Shakespeare once wrote a play and called it All's Well That Ends Well. He could have written that play about preachers if he'd wanted. The best preachers know how to bring their sermons to a successful conclusion. And here are a few ideas about how you can do that.
Conclusions have to have the following elements in them. First of all, they need to have a summary of what has been said. Second, they need to have practical applications of what has been said. And they need to have a closing line that takes the congregation with it and remains with the congregation. In other words, it has to have something that people will remember after the sermon is over. And it must need to have an invitation to concrete action. So a summary of what is said, practical applications, a closing line that remains with the congregation, and an invitation to concrete action. Summaries are restatements of the main idea plus the points. Simple as that. Practical applications show how this teaching affects their everyday lives. Remember to close with a bang. Have something that really catches their attention. It might be a strong illustration at the end of the sermon. It may be a strong restatement, a special way of saying what you've been trying to say that'll stay with them. Just make sure you close with a bang. To illustrate this, think about an Olympic gymnast on the pommel horse. As he does his routine and flies through the air, he's receiving marks for everything he does. But one of the most important part of the routines is when he dismounts, when his feet hit the ground. Many times in gymnastics, if you've ever seen it on the Olympics, you'll see how somebody will fluff the landing. They will take a bounce at the end. And that bounce, that second landing as it were, counts deeply off points. Well, if we were grading sermons in the same way, we would say the same thing. If your sermon has more than one ending, it's too many. You need to end with a bang, to come down with finality and force on what you're doing. Otherwise, you've bobbled it. Many sermons will have 3 or 4 endings simply because the preacher can't figure out how he intended to end. So keep this rule in mind. Only one conclusion is allowed for every sermon. And that conclusion, that sermon should end with finality and force. And if you do that, people will remember what you said in the rest of the sermon. But if you forget that, people will soon forget the sermon too.
John wrote one of the deepest and most profound letters of all human history when he wrote 1 John. He covered a great many topics, but when he got to the end, he just stopped talking. He said, "Keep yourself from idols." And that was it. Maybe that's what we should do sometimes. When we get finished saying what we're saying, we should just stop talking.